I'm Dr. Randall Smith, and for about the last 25 years, I've had the privilege of traveling the lands of Israel, Jordan, Egypt, Turkey, Greece, Cyprus, and Italy as we've been exploring the lands of the Bible. For about the last decade, we've been putting these kinds of journeys on tape, and you'll see now notebooks in hands of students in all of these countries as they begin to study how the places affect our understanding of the Bible. We hope in this series you'll be able to pick up some of that excitement as you see the archaeology and the history and the geography, and as it comes together for your understanding of what the Bible meant to the people that originally experienced God in the text. Welcome to Exploring the Lands of the Bible. Today we're in central Galilee in the north part of Israel looking at Zippori. Zippor is the word bird, and certainly this beautiful city is perched atop a hill. But the uniqueness of the city is that it's destroyed just about the time of the birth of Jesus and being rebuilt during the time that Jesus is growing up as a teenager. So we'll have an opportunity in this city to see what Roman lifestyle was like in the Galilee of the Gentiles in the background of the Gospels. I want to take you now to another site called Zippori. Comes from the word for a bird, Sepphoris of the New Testament period, and it was the largest city being built when Jesus was a teenager. Why is that important? Because it's just one hill over from Nazareth. What was Joseph, Jesus' stepfather's occupation? The word tectone is the word builder. It's translated carpenter, but look around. We don't do wood. Stone floors, stone walls, stone ceilings. So Jesus grows up as a stone worker, a builder. The word for furniture maker or woodworker is a different word. So how come he got carpenter in the English version? Because when King James translated it, all builders built with wood in England. The problem is Jesus didn't live in England. And by the way, we have lots of problems like that, like he's picking corn on Sabbath, but corn wasn't discovered until the New World. So the part of corn will be played by barley in the original. Okay? Lots of things transposed to English lifestyle. And you can trust the narrative, but you have to understand that there are some things that bled into translation. And so we'll try to deal with that. So what I want you to do is make Jesus stronger. Make his arms bigger, because he always looks in artwork like he's going to blow away in a strong wind, you know? Bigger arms, purple fingernails. Anybody who's laid block, you understand what I'm talking about? It's that one time you laid it and it didn't go where it was supposed to and you smashed your fingernails. So I want you to make his hands rough and look for the places Jesus will say things like watchtower, cornerstone. He will mention things that come from the building trade because he's a builder. Joseph the builder's son. Is this not Joseph the builder's son? Not furniture maker. Okay, so we're going to have Jesus now with a little bit more strength and oomph. By the way, as best we can tell, based on burials, he would be about 5'2", somewhere between 128 and 135 pounds. That would be an average male Israelite from the New Testament period. Mulatto complected, that means more or less kind of Hispanic-ish looking skin color. Large, profound schnoz, because that's something that goes with the whole Middle East. Big nose. Probably pretty woolly, kinky hair. Probably quite short. Remember that the earliest picture we have of Jesus, he doesn't have much more hair than Bruce Willis. And the problem is there was a mistake between Nazarene and Nazarite, and the number 6 Nazarite vow without cutting the hair. And so church artists gave him long hair because they thought he was a Nazarite. He wasn't. It's a completely different word. So he didn't get long hair until 1,500 years after he was resurrected. But by then, it was probably a reasonable need for a haircut. I don't know, 1,500 years. Nazareth is this next hill to your right. Now, not where the buildings you're seeing, it's actually on the other side of that hill. There was a little tiny religious Jewish village in Nazareth. What is a builder doing there? He's working on the largest public works project available in his time, and it's on the hill we're going to. So Joseph, who is from Bethlehem, probably chooses to go to the Galilee and locate at Nazareth to be part of the Netzer clan and to work specifically on a very large public works building project going on, funded by the government. So Herod Antipas is the one paying for this by means of taxes coming from Tiberius Caesar. We're going to be taking a look at a very important city. I was reading the other day, just happened to be reading, and there was a rabbi in the Mishnah whose name was Eleazar ben Azariah, a very famous rabbi, makes this offhanded comment that he was scooped up by Rome and accused of being a Christian. Well, he's a Mishnaic rabbi, so he wasn't a Christian. And in the discussion, they said, well, why do you think they thought I was a Christian? And he said, because of the dealings you had in Sepphoris. Sepphoris, what dealings did I have? And then it mentions this. It's just a line. It says, oh, yes, there was one named James who was a follower of the Nazarene who asked me my opinion on a matter. I said I did not know. He said, well, my master taught me, and he gave his opinion. And then I said to him, well, now that sounds right to me. And he walked on. And the rabbi was arrested for being a Christian when they were rounding up Christians, simply because he agreed with something James said to him walking down the street here. What's kind of interesting, I was just reading this the other day, I thought, well, I've never seen that before. But the impact of the early Christians, there was a relationship even across the lines, because they understood Christianity to be a form of Judaism following a specific teacher in the beginning. That was the first century. The city of Zippori is actually broken into three segments from the standpoint of archaeology. There's an upper city where some of the most important people lived in the top of the town. And around the sides of that upper city, the theater was cut into the side of the hill. But on the lower city, the larger marketplace, or the agora, the Roman forum, if you will, was also exposed in the 1980s and 1990s. One of the important parts of this site, though, was the 1.5 kilometers of an aqueduct system and then a rock-cut tunnel that brought water into the city. This is a tunnel that brought enough water for 18,000 people to support in the lower city every day with the water that was coming from it. It comes all the way from the backside of Mashhad in the territory of where Jonah would have come from in the Old Testament period. That water system now can be accessed, and you can even climb through parts of the water system, at least during the dry time of year. It's a marvelous look at the way the Romans engineered the city. Since this city was taken in 63 BC by the Romans, and since this city was again sort of brought under Roman direct control by Herod the Great in 47 BC, he took it in a snowstorm. But because that city was brought together like that, you have a very excellent opportunity to see what Roman engineering was like. One other thing I should say about the city, it was a district capital when the Romans had it. And that city was burned to the ground because of a resistance movement in 4 BC. So the city that we see is largely the city that emerges from the time just about the birth of Jesus all the way until the time of the Gospels, the time when Joseph would have been 6 kilometers away or 4.5 miles away in Nazareth, probably working on a public works project like this. When we go into the lower city, we see the Roman market. This is where we see the very large roads and the ruts in those roadways as you go right through the heart of the forum. To one side of the forum, we stop to note some beautiful mosaics, a Nile mosaic and other mosaics in commercial buildings that were on the lower city. This is important for us because it helps us get an idea of what the shopping district looks like. When you're traveling through, you get the opportunity to see each of the shop areas and know a little bit about what was going on in the downtown. Remember that in the Roman period, 80% of the people lived in tenement housing. That meant that the lower floors are shops, but the upper floors, 3, 4, 5 floors high, were wooden structures built on top that were tenements where the majority of people lived. The poorest people lived at the highest point of a tenement house. The lower city is really a very progressive and beautiful place. Dr. Eric Myers and Zeev Weiss and others have been working there, and over the last few years they've uncovered not only beautiful mosaics, but a good checkerboard of the cross-section of that downtown. You'll notice that the balks themselves are cut in squares, and sometimes they leave the walls between the balks so that they can get a vertical reading on the stratigraphy, so that they can see the layers of the cake, if you will, and know exactly how the city was laid out. There are several important synagogues that are found in this town, mostly from the Talmudic period, from around the 3rd century in the Common Era, the 3rd century AD. But for us, we like to go up to the upper city and observe the very large theater, and then go up to the upper housing units. Professor Jim Strange and others from the University of South Florida were digging on the upper site of Zippori, and in some places they've uncovered houses. But one of the unique parts of this site is the 4,500-seat theater that is built in, looking over the Beit Netofa Valley, looking to the north. This helps you to sort of envision how important a site this became. This is a 2nd, 3rd century theater with 4,500 seats in it. So obviously, the Romanness of this site becomes predominant over the Jewishness of the site. Now, what's interesting is just above the theater, there are a number of houses, Roman villa-style houses, and set right up against them, we notice that there are homes that have mikvaot, or ritual baths, so that you have religious Jews living alongside of wealthy Romans in the Galilee of the Gentiles during the period after the rebuilding of the site, just about the time Jesus is a teenager. Now, I don't know if Jesus was ever on the site. I know that it's a Gentile site, but I also know it's constructed by local workers in the area. If Joseph was working from Nazareth, prefabbing and cutting the stones from out on the edge of that village, he may well have been a part of the building. What I do know is what young boys are like. And I can't imagine that a capital city was being built under a public works project just over the hill from Nazareth, and Jesus was unaware of it as a young man. I would think that Jesus was at least aware of it, if not, got some stone cutting training working with his father in the background of the building of Zippori. This is the largest single public works project in the Galilee during the time of the Gospels. In the upper city, as we walk around, we notice that there are pieces of 5 houses that have been uncovered, and then a large tower that sticks up. The large tower is actually reused stones from an earlier time, and in fact, in the corner of that tower, you notice that there's even a sarcophagus, an old burial place that's been inserted inside the wall. So this was much, much later building. But from the time of Jesus, we can look around and see some houses that have mikvaot, or ritual baths, showing that they are Jewish observant, Orthodox, and religious people. And then next to them we find a very large Roman villa. And it gives us a real opportunity to sort of set some of the stories that come out of Roman villas when Jesus is invited to go and eat in a rich man's house. Now, let me set this setting for you. Nazareth is over there behind the trees. Between Nazareth and Zippori, or Sepphoris of the New Testament, is the Zippori stream. There's a little stream bed there. Then the Beit Netofa Valley behind me, which is like a fingers of one of the lush valleys north of the Jezreel Valley, or the Valley of Armageddon. Sepphoris is a very important city. I could spend a day here and show you things that I think are really well worth seeing, but primarily most of it is outside of our time period. I'm going to fudge just a little bit. The house you're going to see is from 200 AD. We're going to tell stories from about 26 to 30 AD. But the reason I'm doing that is it's the only one that's restored from the period. Some of you know that in 70, something terrible happened in Jerusalem. What was it? The destruction of the temple and the upper quarters of the city, the wealthy quarters of the city. Not all of Jerusalem was destroyed, but a portion of it was destroyed. And then some Jews continued. The smoldering of the first revolt flared up again in a second revolt against Rome in 132 to 135. And Emperor Hadrian came and squashed it and made Jerusalem Aelia Capitolina. Forbade Jews to ride horses in Judea, forbade any of them to live in Jerusalem, threw them out. They began to refer to the area at the end of the first and beginning of the second century, not as the province of the Jews, but as the province of the Philistines, Palestine. It was a way of slapping down the Jews. So, one of the things that happened was the Sanhedrin that used to sit on the south porch of the temple was kicked out. They made 7 moves over the next 200 years. The 6th of the 7 moves was here. The 7th one, Tiberias, where they will finish penning out much of what we will call the Eretz Israel Talmud, or the Talmud of the land of Israel. Remember, there are 2 Jewish communities at the time of Jesus. The one that runs the temple and the one that's in Babylon, in the areas that had been exiled and chose not to come back. So not all of Judaism, it can be founded around the temple at the time of Jesus. And in fact, some estimate as much as 3/5 of the population of Jews didn't live in the country at the time Jesus was here. What I can tell you is this. When they moved here, the rabbis sat here around the period around 200. And one of those rabbis from before that time, Yehuda Hanassi, was buried here reportedly. The importance of this site then for Judaism is it becomes part of the oral tradition. Do you remember that the way religious Jews told the story, Moses went up on the mountain and he got the written law and he also got the oral law. The oral law isn't written down until after the time of Jesus. Contemporary with the writing and organization of the New Testament is what's called the Mishnah, and then commentaries on it, and all together they are called a Talmud. Now, I didn't bring you here to see Mishnaic rabbis. I did bring you here to see a Roman villa. Because when Jesus is invited into wealthy homes, they all have the same format. The format is a format that is very, very common to the Roman period. It's called a villa. And you actually were allowed to come in from the street and go halfway into the house, because only the second half of the villa is the domus, the house itself. What I'd like to do is show you a villa that has been, the domus section of it is covered, the atrium section is not. What's important is that this house gives us a great setting of an atrium, of a vestibule, of a triclinium room with its 3 doors. Remember that the atrium, though this one is not rebuilt, would have had in it a hortus, that is a private garden. And remember that the atrium was part of the public area of the house, so that people could come in as far as the garden and actually see inside the house. As you approach the Roman villa from the New Testament period, this particular villa comes a little bit after that, but it's in the style and footprint of a Roman villa exactly as it would have been in the time of the Gospels. The front of the house, this wall that comes out here, this is all part of this house. Unfortunately, they stopped the restoration there. You'll note that the left half, the front part of the house, has actually not been restored. It's been carved off or dropped off. That's the atrium. Imagine 4 porches around an open to the sky center, with a little Hestia or Vesta shrine in the center for a Roman if it was a pagan house. I want you to notice that the house itself had a porch and then 3 doors that would give you entry into the triclinium room. It is what it is because of the mosaics on the floor. Think wealthy person when you think mosaic. Think upper crust when you think villa. Think Pharisee, Sadducee, somebody who's status conscious. Let me suggest to you that people like Mrs. Zebedee would understand this crowd. Remember, she's the one who says, When you come into your kingdom, would you put my sons on your right and on your left in the kingdom? In other words, I'm interested in status. We're going to go into a Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous type house from 200, so we can set a story from Luke 14, 15, 16, and 17, which is a story that happens on a Sabbath afternoon in a wealthy Pharisee's home. These are Jews, but their interest is in having the good things that come from being in the Roman world. They want the separatism of Judaism, but the prosperity of Rome. What's the image of prosperity? Whatever the Romans are driving, we're driving. Whatever they're wearing, we're wearing. And even the artwork that comes with it. Oh, it happens to be a pagan god. Well, that's okay. We'll overlook it as artwork. And what you have are, I can't call them Hellenistic Jews because they're deeply at their core not. But they're coming as close as you want to get. We have the same kinds of shades of gray within Christianity. You got people that are on the wrong side of the fence, people that are on the right side of the fence, but you couldn't quite tell by the way they live because you really have to know them pretty well to know they're really not on the wrong side of the fence. It's one of those things. Roman villas were, to them, what upscale living was to us. They wanted all the accoutrements of Rome, but the problem is, those who live with those things eventually become like them. And this becomes one of Jesus's biggest problems. Remember that the Jews are divided in the land. You have Pharisees that are most often identified with the poor. They care for the poor. Many of them have wealthy plantations, but they care for the poor. Then you have Zadokites or Sadducees, and many of them are pretty disconnected from the poor. And the reason is their theology. The Sadducees don't believe in an afterlife, so they believe if you're going to be blessed, you only go around once, and you're blessed in the here and now. So they make good prosperity theologians. God blesses in the here and now. I'm wealthy, so I must be doing something right. Pharisees, on the other hand, have an afterlife. They believe in angels. So expect them to have a broader view, although some of them live like Sadducees. And most of the people that Jesus is being invited into their house, these are not poor people. He hangs around with some poor people, but the interesting thing is the layout of the house, because poor people come and watch the wealthy eat. That's one of the unique features of a villa. So let's go inside. I want you to see the villa. We're going to see some beautiful artwork, but then I really want to set the stage for some stories in the life of Jesus, okay? Zippori is called the ornament of all Galilee because of these incredible mosaics that have been found there. We notice as we go into this one Roman villa that we're going to see the most beautiful mosaics, I think, that have ever been discovered in Israel at all. And when you look at the mosaic itself, it's set in the dining hall or the triclinium, a three-sided reclining table around which people had banquets. And the mosaic floor would be the carpeting, and it would pop in your eyes and see a beautiful set of figures. Now, the subject here was the Bacchus and Dionysius wine festivals, but it's also related directly to the wedding festivals. The mosaic contains not only a beautiful picture of probably what is the woman of the house, but also the very well-told mythological story of the Bacchanalia, or the festival of wine. This is a dining room, and the dining room had a three-sided reclining set of couches. Three sides, reclined clinium. A triclinium is a three-sided reclining couch. Do you notice that this is very colorful, but here there's nothing in the mosaic floor? It's because the couches covered it, so you couldn't see anything there. And so people were reclining on their left elbow, eating with their right hand, and there are two types of triclinia. Some where people lie around the floor, not this one, but some where they lie around the floor all the way around tables, and others where they lie on couches here and eat from small round pans or dishes that are placed commonly between them. In the Roman period, people often ate from the same bowl. So in public triclinia, you could dip and hand to someone else the sop, and they would say, "You do me honor," and they would eat it out of your hand. And so familiarity meant that we would reach across, we would lean against each other, we're lying on each other. I want you to remember that in the Last Supper, they are in a triclinium style meal. The rabbis taught one meal a year must be eaten lying down like the rich. So even if you're poor, one meal a year you eat lying down. Today, in modern Jewish homes, they often put a little pillow at the end of the table to remember this. They don't actually lie down, but they put a pillow there. But at any rate, you would all be reclining. Do you remember in the Last Supper meal, John is reclining on Jesus' chest? Everyone's reclining on someone's. The writer's just trying to tell you not that John was feeling ill, but rather where John was around the table. So there are 3 couches and reclining here, and there is a very colorful mosaic that we're going to talk about in just a few minutes. And there's a beautiful kind of Madonna of the Galilee here. The woman here, whose very lovely picture is put right there on the floor. There are 2 stories told on this floor, and I want to tell them in a minute, but first I want to set the room. Do you notice that there's an opening through glass to 3 doors? I want you to imagine that if you stepped outside of the middle door or either of the 2 sides, there would be a porch. It is as wide as from that end of the house to where we walked in, a long porch. Then imagine porches going that way, then a completion of the square, and in the center, imagine a little Vesta shrine and a series of beautiful trees. Now, with religious Jewish adaptation, they took the Vesta shrine down and turned it into something that looks more like a bird bath. But it was a little kind of bird bath surrounded by some beautiful flowers. When you're out on the street, all the way out on the other side of the atrium, you're allowed to come into the garden of the house. You're allowed to come all the way to the door here. And this room dual functioned as a dining room and something called a tablinum. The tablinum was the room where, in the morning, the paterfamilias, or the head of the household, would come out and give the salutatio, and all of the patrons would wait outside. So this room was the one room that was both public and private. This is the middle of the house. Everything back here is the domus. That is the house. And there are rooms off the side in the back, one with a stairway going up to a second floor. Up on the second floor, the gynoeceum. That is, no men go up the stairs. She has her own dressing rooms. She has her own washing rooms. She has her own whatever else they do up there rooms. I wouldn't know. I couldn't go. And you're asking, why does she have a section but he not? He can go everywhere else in the house. So the woman of the house was actually the matron over the house. This was her turf. The one thing he did was meet clients. But you know, there's no offices. Most lawyers, advocates, they never had an office. Where did they meet? The public baths. They went down and they did their business in public spaces, in public baths, and they would sip their wine and sit in a hot room together and talk as men do. And the public spaces were where you transacted your business. This was your home. Now, the interesting thing is that these doors were kept open, and this was considered public space, but behind it was not. So, in the stories of the Gospels, when Jesus is invited into a wealthy home, I want you to picture villa. Wealthy home equals villa. They're all laid out like this. So, what would happen is after a Sabbath service, people would be inviting people back, and the wealthy people would invite people to come and have a meal. And when they came and had a meal, the poorer people that wanted to hear the guest rabbi and the local rabbi have a conversation or debate would come and stand outside the 3 doors and watch them eat and listen to the conversation. There wasn't any television. Nothing else was going to go on anyway, and they really didn't have any food. And if they hung out long enough, somebody might throw them some scraps. And this was a very normal feature of the time period. Now, before I go and set the story for you, I just want to identify what you're looking at. In the center, you might be able to make out Heracles, and this is the competition of Heracles and Dionysus or Dionysius, the god of wine. Remember that Heracles, or Hercules to some of you, took on the god Dionysus in a drinking competition, and it was one of the times Hercules lost. He didn't do so well. Some of you might wonder why you'd have on a floor like this the procession of the Dionysiad, and here's the playing of instruments in the background, and then a picture of a woman. This is actually the story of a Roman wedding. It's actually the story of what is called the Dionysiad cult, or the cult of the mystery. Now, I know you're in a Jewish context and I'm going to tell you a Jewish story, but let me digress and tell you what's here, and then we'll set the story in a room that doesn't have that on the floor, okay? This story is actually a story of what happens to the mystery of a woman becoming a wife. What she passes through are a series of experiences. Do you remember that most people in the first century, most women, became a wife within the first 2 years after reaching puberty? Meaning, she went from being a baby to having babies. She didn't go through this long 12-year time where she found herself. That didn't exist in that time. So what they did was a Dionysiad ritual. The problem was this. The woman was going to become the matron of a house, and her life was going to be about one space. She had been trained and raised in a good home in order to be prepared to take on the matron's responsibilities. But in order to grow up, this is what they did. They basically took her through an experience that began with a washing, a ritual washing or cleansing. The Greeks had a special prenuptial bath that they gave. We get the term a shower from this. But Roman women, they were literally washed over, and some attendants, good friends, came and washed them. So when your friends gave you a shower, they gave you a shower. That's a little weird, but that's what they did. She got her special dress. She had her hair done in a specific method, and the hair itself was drawn back so that it was prepared for a wedding. Her hair matches that style. This is the story of this woman's wedding. It's a Dionysian festival, but here's what they did. Do you remember, we used to call drugs like LSD psychedelic drugs, right? Psyche, mind, delic, clear, mind clear drugs. They used wine, and basically after she was washed and dressed, she needed to have an ecstatic experience set up by wine. They got her drunk. And during this time, she was to have an epiphany. And that epiphany was to be something that would settle her life and give her a mission or call to her home and to her husband. This was the normal pattern from the Augustan period onward for a woman coming of age. So this is a gal who gets to be 13 years of age. They get her ready to go get married. She knows nothing about anything. They get her drunk. This is as normal as fireworks on the 4th of July. And the simple hairstyle in the artwork tells you that this is a woman preparing for a wedding. The story around it is the celebration of the Dionysius festival. Now, there is a Bacchus or Dionysius festival that's remembered year by year, but the mystery of the Dionysiad was a way of saying in Roman culture, a woman about to get married. Now, this is Roman, not Jewish. That's what's going on here. I'm telling you the story because you're looking at it. This is the story of Heracles getting drunk, and this is a story about a woman, and this is the story of, by the way, from here back, that's the house, and she's in charge. From here out, that's the public area, and that's her husband's face that is on her family. A well-run household well run by a matron, gives honor to her husband. And so what goes on behind the scenes needs to match what goes on out here. By the way, the rabbis said that you can tell a wealthy man by a man whose privy, that is his toilet, is close to his dining room. This one is a wealthy person because the bathroom's just over behind Kelly over that side. That means you don't have to run far. Now, I told you this big Greek story. I want you to erase that and make this a really nice design that doesn't have anything pagan on it. Okay? And then I want to tell you a gospel story if I can. If you have a Bible and you're able to see it, I'd like you to go to Luke 14. And I want you to see that at the beginning of Luke 14, there's this story where Jesus comes, and it says, it happened that when he went to the house of one of the leaders of the Pharisees on the Sabbath to eat bread, they were watching him closely. So it's a leader of the Pharisees, wealthy or poor, wealthy, a leader of the Pharisees, coming home on a Sabbath to eat bread, to have lunch, and he invites him over. And in verses 1 through 6, it says this, Jesus went, and a man was suffering from dropsy, and Jesus turned to the people that were around the table and said, is it okay if I heal him? Now, you need to know that 2 chapters before he did it, he healed someone, they made a stink about it, and he totally blew them away with his line of argumentation. You guys will help a donkey out of a ditch, but you won't help one of your own? So nobody's going to answer this time because they're on to him now. Oh no, I'm not touching that one. Now, I want you to see this. Around the table, I want all of these wealthy people lying around the table, eating off of trays. Poor people have come and they're lined up in the atrium and they're watching on the inside. And this is what it says, verse 7, he began to speak a parable to the invited guests. The reason that he's telling you that is they're uninvited guests and invited guests. The seated ones are invited, the standing ones are not. And he starts saying, now look, when you come in, verse 8, and you're invited to someone to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for someone more distinguished than you may have been invited. And they'll come and say, give your place to this man, and then it's a disgrace, and you will proceed to occupy the last place. But when you're invited, go and recline in the lowest place, and when one who has invited you comes, he may say, friend, move up higher. I want you to imagine there are 3 tables around here, or 3 platforms around here. And that one over there are your most important people. This one here are your kaha people, the in-between people that we're glad you came, but if you didn't, we would eat anyway. And these people will be your lowest. So it's declining in order as you go around the table. He says, when you walk in, start at the low spot and get bumped up. Don't start at the high one and get bumped down. Something's going on in the room. And so he says, verse 12, he also went on to say to the one who had invited him, when you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends and your brothers and relatives or neighbors, otherwise they may also invite you in return, and that will be your repayment. But when you give a reception, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. You will be blessed. And they're out there going, amen, preach it. Yeah, yes, we want to hear it. Then, while he's talking, verse 15, one of those who was reclining at the table says this, nice and loud, blessed is everyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God, because he believes that these who have will be the ones God will choose. He's responding to what Jesus said. Wait a minute. I'm not bringing in the people with physical maladies. Obviously, if God was on their side, they'd be well. Blessed are the people that are going to be in the kingdom of God. Look at the guys you're sitting with. Don't insult us. So he said, verse 16, a man was giving a big dinner and he invited many. And at the dinner hour, he sent his slave to say to those who had been invited, come, everything is ready now. But they all alike began to make excuses. First one said, I bought a piece of land and I have to go out and look at it. Another one said, I bought 5 yoke of oxen and I have to go try them out. Another one said, I married a wife and I just can't come.
And the slave came back, reported this to his master, and the head of the household became angry and said to his slave, "Go out at once into the streets and to the lanes and bring the poor and the blind and the crippled and the lame." And the slave said, "Master, what you have commanded us has been done, and still there's room." And the master said, "Go out into the highways and go to the hedges and compel people to come so that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of those who were invited shall ever taste my dinner." And he says, look, if you can't see these people, and you can only invite in the people who will invite you back, you're not doing this for others, you're doing this for yourself. Listen to me. If somebody tells you, give $1 so God will give you back 10, that's not about giving, that's about getting. That's what he's saying. Now, large crowds were going along with him. And by the way, that's not translated well. It should say they were leaning in toward him. Large crowds were listening, and he turned and said to them, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and his mother, his wife, his children, his brothers, his sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple." Now, I want you to imagine that people are a little bit uncomfortable at this point. Whoever does not carry his own cross cannot be my disciple. See, there are people out here who think that he's all on their side and he requires nothing of them. He says, "Oh no, you don't understand. I'm not easy on them and I'm not going to be easy on you either. I want you to understand, if I'm second, I'm not in the room. I'm first, I'm never second. I don't want to be something you put on the Sundays of your life as you punch your card for God. You put me first, or I'm not interested in the relationship." By the way, my wife said the same thing to me. She said, "I will not be second to any other woman." Do all the ladies understand that? Then you understand the Lord. I have no need to be second. So before we go anywhere else, stop and think for a moment. Is he? Because he's only interested in being first. And then it says, large crowds were going along with him, and he turned to them, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother." Look at what he does. "Therefore," he says, "none of you can be my disciple who does not give up on all his possessions. Salt is good, but even salt has become tasteless. What shall it be seasoned with? It is useless neither for the soil nor for the manure pile, but to be thrown out. He who has ears to hear, let him hear." Here's what he's doing. He's sitting in a wealthy setting, and he's trying to say, you guys don't get it. You guys think that as long as you do good things for people who do good things back, you're doing fine for the kingdom, and you're missing the point. And you guys think that as long as you don't have, you're somehow entitled, and you don't have to give me anything, and you're missing the point. I want this kind of sacrifice. That's what I want. Now, this is one of many stories like this. One of many stories. Again, the story on the floor is not the one I'm telling, the story in the house. One of the probably unique features of the Gospels, can I say this? One of the unique features is that you're not used to having banquets where people watch you eat, but they are. Expect them to come out of the synagogue and sit and watch as people are debating, because it's like television. They sit and they listen to the learned teachers talking back and forth, and that's how they learn. The synagogue wasn't primarily a place of worship, it was primarily a place of argument. And the after-synagogue meeting at the dining room was more encouragement to listen to the teachers as they would give you more. I don't want to confuse you. So before we go, I need to make sure you understand a couple of things. One, a Roman-style home used by Jews probably wouldn't, in the first century, yet continue such things as the Dionysian. By the second, third centuries, maybe it would, but it was then considered old artwork and just considered an upscale way of living. I need you to think, though, of the shape of the building and the function of the building and impose that over many stories in wealthy areas around the country. Unfortunately, there aren't any others to show you, so I've got to show you this one. I want you to picture the difference between what you would consider inside my private space and outside. One more thing before we go. When you came in, just outside these 3 doors, hanging on the outside walls, if it were a Roman family, One of the practices of Romans that Jews did not do, but Romans did, was took death masks of their relatives after they died. This continued to be a practice in Europe as well. And they would take a death mask, and it was actually made of a translucent wax that was white. It looked like a cloud. And first thing in the morning, while it was still dark out, a man would walk out and he would light a candle underneath the faces of all of his family. He stood and looked at a cloud of witnesses of those who had gone before him. Then he walked into the house. And that was a way of saying, I honor in my life those who went before me. The writer of Hebrews picks up this idea and says, standing before such a cloud of witnesses, we run the race that is set before us. And all the while we run, we look to our Savior, who actually is the finisher of our race. But I just wanted to set the mind frame. Remember, they're writing to people who live at that time. Things that make sense to them wouldn't necessarily make sense to you.
You remember that the purpose of the prophet was to speak outside of the rose garden. When Deuteronomy 15, verse 4, you shall have no poor among you. The way God wanted the people of Israel to work was not to have class distinction like the nations. The problem is, when class distinction came, it came because the Israelites wanted a king. Well, with a king comes a court. With a court comes class. Haves and have-nots. Do you remember? Samuel was really depressed when the people rose up and wanted a king. With the rise of Saul, do you remember God cautioned them through Samuel's mouth? The kings will take the best of your girls, the best of your young men, the best of your oxen, the best of your plows, the best of your produce. You don't want this. If you do this, you're going to create haves and have-nots. Well, the people wanted it, to be like the world. And as a result, what ended up happening was a separation between what we'll call the rose garden mentality and those of the other people. And God raised up another anointed office. This office was the office of prophet. And the prophet was to speak on behalf of those who were beyond the wealthy, to care for those outside the rose garden, to speak truth to power, and to say God's perspective on what was going on. And prophets often were political commentators. Very often they didn't say anything that was very religious. They said things about politics. That's really what they did. They said, you, O king, have ruined it. This is an alliance you shouldn't make. This is a war you shouldn't take on. Interestingly enough, Jesus came and went to Nazareth and said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he's called me to preach the gospel to the poor, to bind up the brokenhearted, to set the captive free. Jesus came and spoke on behalf of people that other people don't see. No matter where your church is, no matter where, I am absolutely certain that we could fill it. We could fill it to the brim with people. The problem isn't that there aren't needy people. The problem is the church doesn't want them. We want people that will help us forward our goals, not people that will come in and, shall I say it so boldly, put a drag on the system. And there's a town full of people that need to be cared for. Now, I'm not telling you throw out the way you're doing it. I'm not. I'm simply making this point. There is in every group someone who no one's talking to. There is in every town a group of people who no one's addressing. Can I tell you the truth? As the economy falters, this can be the church's finest hour. Because we need not hand out. We can come alongside. And we can, in the right sense of the word, enable people. We can, in the right sense of the word, empower them. Jesus had a way of coming and eating with people others didn't care about. One of the things Judaism did in the first century was learn disenfranchisement movements, easy ways to get kicked out. And there were lots of ways to get out and very few ways to get in. And what Jesus did was open himself up to spending time with people others didn't care about. You want an effective ministry? Walk into any town and look for the people nobody else cares about and care about them. One last thought. Somebody comes into a church and in 6 months, everybody in the church knows their name. Somebody else comes and they're there 6 years, they die, and hardly anyone in the church knows who they were when it's mentioned in the bulletin. The difference? One walked in the door to get served, the other one walked in to serve. You walk in to serve people and you'll become the most important person in the room. Because the way up is the way down. The leadership triangle looks like this. The higher up the triangle you want to go, the more you squeeze out your own rights. And when you finally get to the top at the point, you're exactly where my Savior was, who laid down every right. Then you're the leader. And as long as you want to possess your rights, you don't get to lead. It's that hard. The prophetic challenge is that Jesus could speak on behalf of those others couldn't see. And that's the prophet problem he has. He's very often saying something very insightful, but he's saying it to a group of haves about a group of have-nots, and they can't hear it. And that's one of his problems.
We hope you've enjoyed our visit to the city of Zippori. As we've been traveling together, we were able to see not only some great Roman finds, but a downtown Roman market where we could explore a little bit about what the commerce was like during the Roman period, and even a glimpse into the water system that could keep 18,000 people with enough water to make it through every single day. I hope you've enjoyed your visit. We invite you back next time for exploring the lands of the Bible.